Welcome to the Whispered Ages. This episode is about a day in the life of a medieval jester. We appreciate your support for this channel. Please consider liking and subscribing. Now on with the episode. The bells have not yet rung for matins when consciousness returns, seeping into the small chamber like cold water through cracks in stone. There is no gentle awakening here, no gradual surfacing from the depths of sleep. One moment there is darkness and the mercy of oblivion, and the next there is awareness, sharp and complete, of the day that waits beyond the thin woolen blanket. The room is barely a room at all, a narrow space carved from what was once a storage alcove. It sits wedged between the outer wall of the castle and the back of the great fireplace that serves the hall below. In winter, this proximity to the chimney provides a modicum of warmth that seeps through the stones. In summer, it becomes stifling, the heat trapped and multiplied until sleep comes only from exhaustion. Now, in the uncertain weeks between seasons, the chamber simply exists in its perpetual state of cramped darkness, illuminated only by the faintest grey suggestion of dawn through a window no larger than a man's head. The jester, though he does not think of himself by that title in these private moments, lies still for a breath longer, cataloguing the aches that have accumulated in his body. His left hip protests, where the thin straw mattress has compressed to nothing beneath his weight. His throat carries the raw scrape of yesterday's performance, when he pitched his voice high for nearly an hour to entertain the visiting bishop. His right knee, twisted years ago in a tumble that went wrong, predicts rain before evening. These are the calculations of morning, the arithmetic of the body that must be balanced against the demands of the day. He rises. The stone floor is cold against his bare feet as he moves to the small table where a pitcher of water waits, filled the night before by one of the kitchen boys, who has learned that such small kindnesses are repaid in ways that matter. The water is frigid, carrying the memory of the deep well from which it was drawn, and he splashes it across his face with the practiced efficiency of one who has performed this ritual thousands of times. There is no mirror in his chamber. Mirrors are expensive things, reserved for the nobility, but he does not need one. His fingers know the topography of his own face better than any reflection could show him. The lines that have deepened around his eyes over the years, the small scar above his left eyebrow, from a thrown cup that found its mark during a performance that pushed too far. The stubble that he will need to scrape away before presenting himself, for a jester, must appear either perfectly groomed or deliberately disheveled, never merely unkempt. He attends to this task with a blade that he keeps sharper than most kitchen knives, working by touch and long practice in the dim light. A nick would be more than an inconvenience. Blood on his face would require explanation, would invite questions, would disrupt the careful construction of the persona he must inhabit for the next 16 hours. The costume waits. It hangs from a peg on the wall, and even in the near darkness its colors seem to pulse with their own inner light. The parti-colored fabric, one side a deep crimson, the other a vivid yellow that the dye is achieved through some closely guarded process involving saffron, and the urine of cattle-fed specific herbs, represents more than mere cloth. It is armor and prison both. It is the visible sign of his office, his protection, and his cage. He begins with the undergarments, simple linen that could belong to any man. For these few moments, he remains himself, whoever that might be, after so many years of playing the fool. Then come the hose, one leg red, one leg yellow, the colors climbing his body and beginning their transformation. The tunic follows, its bells silent for now, sewn into stillness by a clever arrangement of loops and ties that he will release only when he is ready to perform. There is an art to controlling when the bells speak. An amateur lets them jingle constantly, turning their music into meaningless noise. A master knows that silence makes the sound meaningful, that anticipation is half of any joke. The shoes are perhaps the most distinctive element of his costume. They are long, absurdly so, extending nearly a foot beyond his actual toes, and curling upward at the ends in a shape that suggests nothing so much as a question mark made flesh. Walking in them requires a particular gait, a kind of rolling shuffle, that he has so thoroughly internalized that he now finds himself moving strangely, even when wearing ordinary footwear. The body remembers what the mind would forget. Finally, the hood. It frames his face in a cascade of fabric points, each tipped with a small bell that will announce his presence long before he enters any room. When he pulls it over his head and settles it into place, the transformation is complete. The man who woke in darkness has disappeared, replaced by a figure from the margins of illuminated manuscripts, a creature of color and sound whose purpose is to provoke laughter from those who hold the power of life and death. He stands for a moment in the darkness of his chamber, feeling the familiar weight of the costume settle onto his shoulders. The bells are still silent, bound in their loops, but he can sense their potential energy, their eagerness to ring out and announce him to the world. There is a ritual he performs each morning, a private moment before the public performance begins. He closes his eyes and breathes deeply, drawing the cold morning air into his lungs. And he asks himself the same question he has asked every day for more than 20 years. What kind of fool will I be today? The answer varies. Some days call for the simple fool, the tumbler and rhymer who delights with physical comedy and harmless wordplay. Other days demand the wise fool, the one who speaks truth through the veil of jest, who can say to a king what no counselor would dare whisper. And some days, the dangerous days, require the fool who knows when to be silent, when to fade into the background of tapestries and furniture, when to make himself so small and insignificant that the powerful forget he has ears to hear their secrets. The castle bell begins to toll for matins, its deep voice resonating through the stone walls, and the jester knows that his time of solitude has ended. He reaches up and releases the first of the loops that bind his bells, and a single clear note rings out in the darkness of his chamber. Then another. Then a cascade of sound as he shakes himself into full jingling life. He opens the door and steps into the corridor, and the man who woke in the dark is gone. Only the fool remains. The corridor outside his chamber is a narrow passage that runs along the inner wall of the castle, connecting the servants' quarters to the main halls through a series of turns and stairs designed more for function than comfort. At this hour, it is populated by the early risers of the castle's unseen army. The servants who must have fires lit and water heated before their masters wake, the guards changing from night watch to day duty, the kitchen workers who have been laboring since well before dawn to prepare the first meal of the day. The jester moves among them with the particular awareness that has kept him alive and employed for more than 2 decades. His bells announce his presence, but his eyes are already at work, reading the subtle signs that will tell him what kind of day awaits. There, a chambermaid he recognizes, one who serves the queen's ladies-in-waiting, hurries past with her head down and her shoulders tight. Her usual greeting, a small nod, sometimes a half smile, is absent. She does not even glance in his direction. This tells him something. The queen's chambers are tense this morning. Perhaps an argument with the king. Perhaps news from her family abroad. Perhaps simply the unpredictable storms of royal mood that blow through the castle without warning or reason. He files this information away and continues walking. A guard stands at the junction where the servants' corridor meets the main passage leading to the great hall. The jester knows this man, has shared cups of ale with him on quiet evenings, has learned the names of his children and the village where his wife waits for his retirement from service. The guard's face this morning is carefully neutral, but his hand rests on his sword hilt in a way that suggests alertness rather than habit. Something happened during the night. The jester does not ask. To ask would be to step outside his role, to acknowledge that he is gathering intelligence, rather than simply wandering through the castle in his fool's motley. Instead, he offers a small jest, a play on words involving the guard's name and the early hour, delivered with just enough volume to be heard, but not enough to disturb anyone who might be sleeping in the chambers above. The guard's face relaxes slightly, and he offers a response that contains, buried within its apparent meaninglessness, a crucial piece of information. The king did not sleep well. He was up late, consulting with messengers who arrived after dark. The content of those messages is unknown, but the mood they created was not good. This changes everything about the day ahead. The jester adjusts his mental calculations as he continues through the castle. A king who has slept poorly is unpredictable. He may be irritable, quick to anger, dangerous to those who miscalculate his mood. Or he may be desperate for distraction, hungry for the relief that laughter brings, more generous than usual to those who can provide it. The jester has seen both outcomes from the same cause, and there is no way to know which version of the king will greet him until he enters the royal presence. He passes through a gallery, where pale morning light filters through windows of thick, uneven glass, casting distorted patterns on the stone floor. Here, the tapestries that line the walls depict scenes of hunting and battle, their colors faded by decades of sunlight, but still vibrant enough to suggest the blood of stags and the glory of victory. The jester has walked past these images thousands of times, but he still finds himself glancing at them, reading them for clues about the mentality of the family he serves. They value strength. They value conquest. They value the appearance of nobility even when the reality falls short. These are useful things to know when crafting jokes that will please rather than offend. A door opens ahead of him, and a figure emerges that causes the jester to adjust his posture subtly, his bells chiming with the movement. It is the king's confessor, a thin man with eyes like chips of slate, who carries himself with the particular rigidity of one who believes himself to be in direct communication with divine authority. The priest does not approve of the jester. He has made this clear on numerous occasions, in sermons that reference the sinfulness of frivolity, and in private comments that question whether a man who makes his living through mockery can truly have a place in a Christian court. The jester offers a bow that is precisely calibrated, deep enough to show respect for the priest's office, shallow enough to suggest that this respect has limits. His bells jingle softly, a sound that he knows the confessor finds irritating, and he allows a small smile to play across his face. The priest passes without acknowledgement, his robe sweeping the floor, his attention fixed on whatever spiritual business occupies his morning. The jester watches him go, and adds another piece to his mental map of the day. The confessor was coming from the direction of the royal chambers. At this hour, that likely means he was summoned during the night, perhaps to hear a confession, perhaps to offer counsel about whatever news arrived with those late messengers. The king is troubled in conscience, as well as mood. This is valuable information. A king who feels guilty is a king who may seek absolution through generosity, or who may lash out at those around him in an attempt to externalize his inner turmoil. The jester will need to be especially careful today, especially attuned to the subtle shifts in royal temperament that can mean the difference between reward and punishment. He descends a narrow staircase, worn smooth by centuries of feet, and emerges into the lower regions of the castle, where the kitchens fill the air with the smell of baking bread and roasting meat. Here the atmosphere is different from the tense corridors above. The kitchen staff work with the focused efficiency of people who have too much to do and too little time to do it. But there is also a warmth here, both literal and figurative, that is absent from the formal spaces of the court. The jester has cultivated relationships in the kitchen with the same care that a gardener tends valuable plants. The head cook, a formidable woman whose arms are thick with muscle from years of lifting heavy pots, and whose tongue is sharp enough to flay the hide from any servant who displeases her, treats him with a gruff affection that she shows to few others. She knows that he carries favor with the king, that a good word from the fool can sometimes protect a servant from punishment, and she repays this potential protection with information and occasional treats from her domain. This morning, she is overseeing the preparation of what appears to be an unusually elaborate breakfast, her voice cutting through the clatter and steam as she directs her subordinates with military precision. When she sees the jester approaching, she jerks her head toward a corner where a small table holds a cup of warmed ale and a fresh roll, still steaming from the oven. He accepts this offering with genuine gratitude, settling onto a stool that has been worn to a comfortable smoothness by years of use. The ale is weak but warm, cutting through the morning chill that still lingers in his bones, and the bread is soft and fragrant, a luxury compared to the coarse fare that most of the castle's inhabitants consume. The cook approaches while pretending to inspect a nearby rack of hanging herbs, and she speaks without looking at him, her voice pitched low beneath the general noise of the kitchen. Visitors expected, important ones. The elaborate breakfast is preparation for a formal reception that will take place before midday, though the identity of the visitors is not yet known to the kitchen staff. What is known is that the king's steward has been issuing orders since before dawn, demanding that everything be perfect, that the castle present its finest face to whoever is arriving. The jester absorbs this information while appearing to focus entirely on his breakfast. Visitors mean opportunity and danger in equal measure. New faces in the court are unpredictable, their sensibilities unknown, their tolerance for the jester's particular brand of humor untested. What makes one noble laugh may deeply offend another, and giving offense to the wrong person can have consequences that range from temporary disfavor to permanent exile or worse. But visitors also bring fresh material, new stories, new mannerisms, new targets for gentle mockery that the regular court has heard too many times. A skilled jester can observe a newcomer for mere minutes and construct an impression that will delight the king while appearing to honor the guest. It is a delicate art, walking the line between flattery and insult, but it is an art that the jester has spent his life perfecting. A young kitchen boy approaches with a message. The jester is wanted in the great hall. The morning court is assembling earlier than usual, presumably in preparation for the expected visitors. He drains the last of his ale, tucks the remainder of his roll into a pocket of his tunic for later, and rises from his stool. The cook catches his eye as he leaves, and something passes between them that requires no words. Be careful today. The currents are strange. He acknowledges her warning with the slightest nod, his bells chiming softly. And then he is gone, climbing back through the layers of the castle toward the great hall where his performance must begin. The great hall is already filling when he arrives, though the king's chair remains empty at the head of the long table that dominates the room. Courtiers cluster in small groups, their conversations conducted in the particular murmur that characterizes court speech, loud enough to be heard by intended listeners, soft enough to be denied if overheard by the wrong ears. The jester pauses at the entrance, taking a moment to survey the scene before making his presence known. The light in the hall is still dim, the morning sun not yet high enough to fully illuminate the stained glass windows that line the eastern wall. Servants move along the edges of the room, lighting additional candles and arranging the chairs and benches that will accommodate the court during the morning's business. The tapestries that cover the stone walls seem to shift in the flickering light, their woven figures appearing to move and breathe. The jester identifies the key figures in the room, with the practiced eye of one whose survival depends on understanding the court's complex hierarchy. There is the chancellor, an elderly man whose mind remains sharp despite his failing body, conferring with two of his clerks over a sheaf of documents. There is the master of horse, a bluff nobleman who prefers the company of his animals to that of his fellow courtiers, but who must nonetheless attend these morning sessions. There is the king's younger brother, a man whose ambition is poorly concealed behind a facade of loyal subservience, surrounded by a small group of supporters whose loyalty to him rather than the king is an open secret that everyone pretends not to know. And there in a corner, speaking with unusual intensity to a woman the jester recognizes as one of the queen's ladies, is the lord whose lands border the kingdom to the north, whose allegiance has been questioned in whispered conversations for months, whose presence at court this particular morning may or may not be connected to the messengers who arrived in the night. The jester releases another loop on his bells, allowing them to ring more freely, and steps into the hall. The effect is immediate. Heads turn. Conversations pause. The fool has arrived, and with him comes the possibility of entertainment, of distraction, of the particular relief that laughter brings to the tension of court life. Some faces show genuine pleasure at his appearance. Others show carefully concealed annoyance. Few show the wariness of those who have learned to fear the fool's wit, who know that his jokes can cut as deeply as any sword. He moves through the room with the rolling gait that his costume demands, his bells providing a constant musical accompaniment to his progress. He offers greetings calibrated to each recipient, a low bow and flowery compliment to a duchess known for her vanity, a sly wink to a young knight who shares his appreciation for a particular serving maid, a respectful nod to the chancellor that acknowledges the old man's dignity without demanding any response. These are the small performances that fill the spaces between the larger ones, the constant maintenance of relationships that keeps the jester's position secure. Every interaction is an opportunity to build goodwill or to gather information, and he wastes none of them. The king's brother watches his approach with an expression that the jester has learned to read as dangerous interest. This is a man who sees the fool as a potential tool, who has on several occasions attempted to recruit him as a spy within the king's inner circle. The jester has deflected these overtures with carefully constructed ambiguity, neither accepting nor refusing, maintaining the pretense that he is too simple to understand what is being asked, while making clear that his loyalty, such as it is, remains with whoever sits on the throne. Today he offers the brother a jest about the early hour, a harmless bit of wordplay that acknowledges the man's presence without inviting further conversation. The brother smiles, but his eyes remain calculating, and the jester moves on before the interaction can deepen into anything more significant. A trumpet sounds from somewhere beyond the hall, and the scattered conversations fall silent. The king is approaching. Courtiers arrange themselves in the positions that protocol demands, forming a loose aisle from the main entrance to the raised dais where the throne sits. The jester takes his own position, slightly to one side of the throne, close enough to be at hand when needed, but far enough to be unobtrusive when not. The doors open, and the king enters. He is not a large man, but he carries himself with the particular bearing that comes from a lifetime of being obeyed. His face this morning shows the evidence of the poor sleep that the jester already knew about. Shadows beneath the eyes, a tightness around the mouth that suggests clenched teeth, a quality of suppressed energy that could erupt in any direction. He wears his formal robes rather than the simpler garments he often prefers for morning court, confirming that the expected visitors are indeed important. The queen walks beside him, her own face composed into the serene mask that she wears in public, revealing nothing of whatever tensions may exist between her and her husband. She is dressed magnificently, her gown a cascade of blue silk embroidered with silver thread, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have required her ladies to work since before dawn. She does not look at the jester as she passes, but this is normal. The queen has never quite known what to make of him, has never fully accepted the necessity of his presence in her husband's court. The royal couple ascends to the dais and takes their seats, and the formal business of the morning begins. The jester watches and waits. The early portion of morning courts is typically devoted to administrative matters, reports from various officials, petitions from subjects seeking royal judgment, the endless bureaucratic machinery that keeps a kingdom functioning. His role during this phase is minimal. He stands ready, observing everything, preparing the material he will need when the time comes for entertainment. The chancellor presents a dispute over fishing rights in a river that forms the boundary between two noble estates. The jester notes the names of the nobles involved, files away details about their families and histories that might prove useful for future jests. The master of horse reports on the condition of the royal stables and requests funds for the purchase of new breeding stock. The jester calculates whether the king's mood will tolerate a joke about horses, decides that it probably will not, and sets the idea aside for another day. Through it all, he watches the king. The royal mood is indeed volatile this morning. The king's responses to the various petitioners range from bored tolerance to sharp irritation, with no apparent pattern that the jester can discern. Twice, the king cuts off speakers in mid-sentence, demanding that they get to the point. Once, he grants a petition with such abrupt generosity that the petitioner seems almost frightened by his good fortune. The queen sits motionless beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her face revealing nothing. The jester adjusts his plans. He had prepared several pieces of material for this morning, including a satirical song about a recent scandal involving a minor nobleman and a merchant's wife. But the king's mood suggests that anything too pointed might be dangerous. Better to begin with something safe, something physical, something that requires no thought from the audience beyond simple amusement. When the administrative business concludes and the king signals for entertainment, the jester is ready. He steps forward, his bells ringing out a cheerful announcement of his presence, and he launches into a tumbling routine that he has performed hundreds of times. The movements are so familiar that he can execute them without conscious thought, leaving his mind free to monitor the king's reaction, to adjust his timing based on the responses he observes. A cartwheel that ends in a deliberate stumble, a handstand that wobbles comically before collapsing, a series of pratfalls that build on each other, each one more elaborate than the last. The court laughs, not the polite, restrained laughter that greets mediocre entertainment, but genuine amusement that ripples through the hall. Even the king's face relaxes slightly, the tension around his mouth easing as he watches the fool's antics. The jester pushes further. He incorporates elements of mimicry into his routine, briefly adopting the postures and mannerisms of various courtiers in ways that are recognizable but not cruel. The master of horses' bow-legged walk, the chancellor's habit of peering over invisible spectacles, the king's brother's tendency to stand with his hand on his hip, as if perpetually posing for a portrait. This last impression draws a sharp laugh from the king himself, and the jester knows that he has found his footing. The brother's face tightens almost imperceptibly, but he joins in the laughter, understanding that to show offense would be to reveal the ambition that the joke implicitly mocks. The performance continues for perhaps a quarter of an hour, the jester moving through his repertoire of physical comedy with the ease of long practice. He tells no jokes that require thought, makes no observations that could be construed as commentary on the kingdom's affairs. This is pure entertainment, designed to soothe rather than stimulate, to release tension rather than create it. When he finally bows and retreats to his position beside the throne, the atmosphere in the hall has shifted. The king's mood, while still not entirely stable, has improved noticeably. The courtiers are more relaxed, their conversations resuming with a lighter tone. The jester has done his job, has earned his keep for another morning. But the day is far from over. The formal court session ends, and the hall begins to empty as courtiers drift away to attend to their various affairs. The jester remains in place, knowing from experience that he may be summoned at any moment, that his presence is expected until explicitly dismissed. The king confers briefly with his chancellor, their heads close together, their voices too low to be overheard. The queen rises and departs with her ladies, her blue gown sweeping across the floor like water flowing downhill. Then the king turns and gestures to the jester, a small movement of the hand that carries the weight of royal command. Follow. They move through the castle by a private route, the king walking ahead with the quick, impatient stride of a man who has too much to think about. The jester following a few paces behind, his bells muted now by the loops he has refastened. The guards who stand at various doorways come to attention as they pass, then return to their positions, their faces carefully blank. The king's private chambers occupy a suite of rooms in the oldest part of the castle, where the walls are thickest and the windows smallest, where security takes precedence over comfort. The outer room is a study of sorts, lined with books and maps, and the various objects that a king accumulates over a lifetime of rule. The inner room, visible through a partially open door, contains the royal bed, its curtains drawn back to reveal rumpled linens that confirm the poor sleep the jester already knew about. The king drops into a chair by the fire lit, despite the warming season, perhaps for comfort rather than warmth, and waves the jester to a stool nearby. This is unusual. Normally, the jester stands during private audiences, ready to perform at a moment's notice. Being invited to sit suggests something other than entertainment is wanted. For a long moment, neither speaks. The fire crackles. Somewhere in the castle, a dog barks and is silenced. The jester waits, understanding that the king will speak when he is ready, that to prompt him would be to overstep the boundaries of their strange relationship. When the king finally speaks, his voice is tired, stripped of the formal cadence he uses in public. Tell me something true. This is the most dangerous request a jester can receive. The fool's privilege, the license to speak freely that is granted to no other member of the court, comes with a weight that few understand. To tell a king the truth is to risk everything. To tell him a lie dressed as truth is to betray the very purpose of the fool's existence. The jester must navigate between these perils with nothing but his wit to guide him. He considers his response carefully. The king is not asking for flattery. He has courtiers enough for that. Nor is he asking for criticism, which he would receive from his confessor if he wanted it. He is asking for perspective, for the particular clarity that comes from standing outside the normal hierarchies of power. The jester speaks slowly, choosing each word with care. He talks about a farmer he once knew, years ago before he came to court. This farmer had a field that produced excellent wheat, year after year, the envy of his neighbors. But the farmer was never satisfied. He was always looking at the fields beyond his own, wondering if they might produce even better wheat, wondering if he was missing some opportunity by staying where he was. One year, he traded his good field for one of those distant fields, convinced that the grass was greener on the other side of the hill. The new field turned out to be rocky and poor, and the farmer spent the rest of his life trying to get back what he had given away. The king listens without interrupting. When the jester finishes, there is another long silence. Then the king laughs, a short, humorless sound that has nothing to do with amusement. "You think I am the farmer?" The jester neither confirms nor denies. He has said what he was asked to say, has offered his truth wrapped in the protective clothing of parable. What the king does with it is not his concern. The conversation shifts to lighter matters. The king asks about the new song the jester has been working on, and the jester performs a few verses, adjusting the lyrics on the fly to incorporate references that only the king will fully understand. They discuss the expected visitors. The king reveals that they are ambassadors from a neighboring kingdom, come to negotiate a marriage alliance for the king's eldest daughter, and the jester offers observations about the ambassador's likely personality based on what he knows of that kingdom's court. This is the other role the jester plays, one that few outside the castle walls would understand. He is not merely an entertainer, he is a counselor of sorts, a sounding board for royal thoughts, a source of perspective that is uncontaminated by the ambitions and fears that color the advice of noble advisors. The king can think aloud in the jester's presence, in a way that he cannot with anyone else, contest ideas and express doubts, without worrying that his words will be reported to rivals or used against him. It is an exhausting intimacy. The jester must be constantly alert, constantly calibrating his responses to the king's mood, constantly aware that a single misstep could shatter the trust that has been built over years of careful service. He must be entertaining without being trivial, honest without being harsh, supportive without being sycophantic. He must be, in essence, whatever the king needs him to be in any given moment. The audience lasts for nearly an hour. When it ends, the king dismisses him with a wave and a muttered instruction to be ready for the evening feast, where the ambassadors will be formally received. The jester bows and withdraws, his bells chiming softly as he backs out of the royal presence. In the corridor outside, he allows himself a moment of stillness, leaning against a cool stone wall and closing his eyes. The morning has been successful. He has navigated the king's volatile mood without incident, has provided both entertainment and counsel, has gathered information that will help him prepare for the challenges ahead. But the effort has left him drained in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who has not lived this life. He makes his way through the castle to a small courtyard that few people use, a forgotten corner where a broken fountain sits amid overgrown herbs that were once part of a physic garden. Here in this quiet space, he can remove some of the weight of his performance, can exist for a few hours as something other than the fool. He sits on the edge of the fountain, its basin dry and cracked, and looks up at the sky. Clouds are gathering in the west, confirming what his knee predicted earlier. Rain will come before evening, which will affect the mood of the feast, which will require adjustments to his planned performance. The calculations never stop, even in moments of rest. His thoughts drift to the past, to the winding path that led him to this courtyard, this costume, this life of perpetual performance. He was not born to be a jester. Few are. He came from a family of modest means, not peasants, but not nobility either. His father was a craftsman, a maker of fine leather goods whose work was prized by the local gentry. His mother was the daughter of a merchant, educated enough to read and write, ambitious enough to want more for her children than the life she had known. He showed an early talent for mimicry, for making people laugh. The village priest, who might have been expected to disapprove of such frivolity, instead recognized something valuable in the boy and arranged for him to be educated at the local monastery. There, among the monks who copied manuscripts and preserved the learning of ages past, he learned to read and write, to understand Latin, to appreciate the power of words and the art of rhetoric. But he also learned that he did not belong in that world of silence and contemplation. His nature was too restless, too hungry for the world beyond the monastery walls. When he was 16, He left with the blessing of the abbot and the curse of his parents, who had hoped he would become a priest and elevate the family's standing. For years he wandered. He joined a troupe of traveling performers, learning the physical skills of tumbling and juggling, the verbal skills of storytelling and improvisation. He performed at fairs and festivals, in taverns and town squares, for audiences that ranged from appreciative to hostile. He was beaten twice, robbed 3 times, and nearly killed once by a nobleman who took offense at a joke that was not even directed at him. Gradually, his reputation grew. He was invited to perform at noble houses, then at the courts of minor lords, then at increasingly important gatherings. He learned to read the complex dynamics of aristocratic society, to understand the unspoken rules that governed what could and could not be said in the presence of power. He developed the particular skills that would eventually bring him to the attention of the king. The ability to be funny without being offensive, to be truthful without being dangerous, to be memorable without being threatening. The invitation to join the royal court came when he was in his early 30s, already considered old for a profession that demanded physical agility and quick wit. He accepted, knowing that it was both the culmination of his career and the beginning of a new kind of captivity. A court jester cannot leave. He belongs to the king as surely as any other piece of royal property. His freedom, such as it was, ended the moment he walked through the castle gates. That was more than 20 years ago. He has served 3 kings now: the current monarch's father, who hired him; the current monarch's elder brother, who reigned briefly and badly before dying without heirs; and the current monarch himself, who has proven to be the most complex and demanding of the 3. He has watched children grow to adulthood, has seen alliances formed and broken, has witnessed betrayals and reconciliations, has been present for moments of historical significance that will be remembered long after his own name is forgotten. And through it all, he has worn the motley, has rung the bells, has made them laugh. He wonders sometimes what he would have been if he had made different choices. If he had stayed in the monastery, he might be an abbot now, ruling his own small domain of prayer and scholarship. If he had remained with the traveling troupe, he might be dead, or he might be training a new generation of performers, passing on the skills he learned in his youth. If he had never discovered his talent for making people laugh, he might be a craftsman like his father, working with leather, living a quiet life in the village where he was born. But these are idle thoughts, the kind of speculation that fills the empty hours between performances. He is what he is. He has become the fool so completely that he is not certain anymore where the performance ends and the person begins. The costume feels more natural than ordinary clothes. The bells are the music of his existence. The laughter of the court is the only validation that matters. He reaches into his pocket and retrieves the roll he saved from breakfast, now cold and slightly stale. He eats it slowly, savoring each bite, watching the clouds gather and thicken in the western sky. Soon he will need to return to the castle, to prepare for the evening feast, to don the full armor of his performance. But for now, in this quiet courtyard, he can simply exist. A cat appears from somewhere among the overgrown herbs, a thin grey creature with suspicious eyes. The jester breaks off a piece of his roll and tosses it toward the animal, which sniffs it cautiously before accepting the offering. They sit together in companionable silence, the fool and the stray, 2 creatures who have learned to survive on the margins of a world that does not quite know what to make of them. The afternoon passes. The jester works on his material for the evening, running through songs and jokes in his mind, considering which will be appropriate for the visiting ambassadors and which should be saved for a more familiar audience. He mends a small tear in his tunic, using a needle and thread he keeps in a pouch at his belt. He practices a new tumbling sequence that he has been developing, a series of movements that will appear to be a catastrophic fall, but will actually be carefully controlled, ending in a position that allows for a quick recovery and a triumphant flourish. The rain begins as the afternoon wanes, a gentle drizzle at first that gradually intensifies into a steady downpour. The jester retreats to a covered walkway that borders the courtyard, watching the rain transform the dry fountain into a temporary pool. The sound of water on stone is soothing, a natural music that asks nothing of him. He thinks about the evening ahead. The ambassadors will be the center of attention, but the jester will have his role to play. He will need to entertain without overshadowing the diplomatic business, to ease tensions without trivializing the serious matters under discussion, to make the foreign visitors feel welcome without appearing to mock their unfamiliar customs. It is a delicate balance, one that requires all the skills he has developed over a lifetime of performance. He thinks about the king's question from earlier. "Tell me something true." The request haunts him, as such requests always do. He offered a parable about a farmer, a story that was true in its way, but that avoided the specific truth the king was probably seeking. Was that wisdom or cowardice? He is not sure. He is never sure. The truth is that he sees things in the court that trouble him. He sees the king's brother gathering allies, building a faction that could challenge the throne if the right opportunity arose. He sees the queen growing distant from her husband, retreating into a world of her own that excludes him more each year. He sees the kingdom's finances strained by the costs of maintaining the court's splendor, the taxes that squeeze the common people ever harder, the resentment that builds in villages and towns far from the castle's walls. These are truths that he cannot speak, not even wrapped in the protective clothing of jest. To speak them would be to take sides in conflicts that could destroy him. The jester's power lies precisely in his apparent powerlessness, in the assumption that he is too foolish to understand the serious matters that swirl around him. If he revealed the depth of his understanding, he would become a threat, and threats in a royal court have a tendency to disappear. So he tells parables about farmers. He makes jokes about horses and hunting, and the minor scandals of minor nobles. He tumbles and juggles and sings, and he keeps his true observations locked away in a part of his mind that no one else can access. It is a lonely way to live. The rain continues as evening approaches. Servants scurry through the castle, making final preparations for the feast. The jester returns to his chamber to change into his finest costume, the one reserved for the most important occasions. It is similar to his everyday motley but more elaborate, the colors richer, the bells more numerous, the fabric embroidered with thread that catches the light and seems to glow. He examines himself in the polished metal plate that serves as a mirror, checking that everything is in place, that his appearance is exactly what it should be. The face that looks back at him is familiar and strange, a face he has worn for so long that he sometimes forgets what lies beneath it. The lines around his eyes have deepened since the last time he really looked. His hair, what remains of it beneath the hood, is more grey than brown now. He is getting old, though he tries not to think about what that means for a man in his profession. He makes his way to the great hall, where the feast is already beginning to assemble. The hall has been transformed since the morning, the tables laden with silver and gold, the candles multiplied until the room blazes with light. The ambassadors have arrived. He learns from the whispered conversations of servants, a delegation of 6 men led by a duke, who is said to be both clever and humorless, a dangerous combination for a jester to navigate. The king and queen enter together, their earlier tensions apparently set aside for the sake of diplomatic appearances. The ambassadors are presented with elaborate ceremony, their titles recited, their credentials accepted, their places at the high table assigned. The jester watches from his position near the throne, cataloguing details that might prove useful. The way the lead ambassador holds himself, the nervous habits of his subordinates, the quality of their clothing and jewelry. The feast begins. Course after course emerges from the kitchens, each more elaborate than the last. The jester moves through the hall, offering entertainment in the spaces between dishes, keeping the mood light as the serious business of negotiation proceeds in undertones at the high table. He tells jokes that require no knowledge of local politics, performs physical comedy that transcends language barriers, sings songs whose melodies are more important than their words. The lead ambassador, the humorless duke, watches him with an expression that is difficult to read. Not hostile exactly, but evaluating, assessing, calculating. The jester recognizes the look. It is the look of someone who is trying to determine whether the fool is truly a fool or something more dangerous. He responds by becoming more foolish than ever, exaggerating his pratfalls, making his jokes broader and less subtle. He becomes the simple entertainer, the harmless buffoon, the court decoration that poses no threat to anyone. The ambassador's expression relaxes slightly, and the jester knows that he has passed some kind of test. The evening progresses. The wine flows freely, and the mood in the hall shifts from formal tension to something approaching genuine festivity. Even the king seems to relax, his earlier troubles temporarily forgotten in the warmth of hospitality and the progress of negotiations. The queen smiles at something one of the ambassadors says, and for a moment the distance between her and her husband seems to narrow. The jester works the room, moving from table to table, offering personalized entertainment to each group of guests. For the older nobles, he tells stories from the court's history, tales of past kings and queens that flatter the present by comparison. For the younger courtiers, he offers wit and wordplay, the kind of clever humor that makes them feel sophisticated. For the servants who hover at the edges of the room, he offers small kindnesses, a wink, a shared joke, a moment of recognition that acknowledges their humanity in a setting that often ignores it. As the hour grows late and the candles burn low, the formal entertainment concludes. The ambassadors retire to their quarters, escorted by the king's steward. The courtiers drift away in twos and threes, their conversations trailing behind them like ribbons in the wind. The king and queen depart together, their public unity maintained until the last possible moment. The jester remains in the hall, as the servants begin the long process of clearing away the remnants of the feast. He is tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical exertion but from hours of constant performance, constant vigilance, constant calculation. But there is also a satisfaction in the tiredness, a sense of a job well done, a day successfully navigated. He helps one of the younger servants right a chair that has been knocked over, an act of kindness that will be remembered and repaid in small ways over the coming weeks. He exchanges a few words with the head cook, who has emerged from the kitchens to survey the aftermath of her labors, and he learns that the ambassadors were pleased with the food, which is a good sign for the negotiations. He accepts a cup of wine from a server who knows his preferences, and he drinks it slowly, letting the warmth spread through his tired body. Then he makes his way back to his chamber, through corridors that are now quiet, past guards who nod in recognition, up the narrow stairs that lead to his small room beside the chimney. The castle is settling into sleep around him, the great stone beast that shelters them all finally at rest, after the exertions of the day. In his chamber he removes the costume piece by piece, reversing the ritual of the morning. The hood comes off first, releasing his head from its frame of bells. Then the tunic, its weight lifting from his shoulders like a burden set down. The hose, the shoes, the undergarments, until he stands naked in the darkness, just a man, no longer a fool. He washes in the cold water that remains in his pitcher, scrubbing away the sweat and grime of the day's performance. He pulls on a simple nightshirt, rough linen that feels almost luxurious after the elaborate costume he has worn for so many hours. He lies down on his narrow bed, feeling the familiar complaints of the thin mattress, the familiar aches of his aging body. The bells hang silent on their peg, waiting for morning. He thinks about the day that has passed, the tense awakening, the careful navigation of the castle's moods, the morning court and its volatile king, the private audience and its dangerous request for truth, the afternoon of preparation and reflection, the evening feast with its foreign visitors and delicate diplomacy. Each moment required something from him, demanded a performance that was calibrated to the specific needs of that particular instant. And he provided it, as he has provided it every day for more than 20 years. He thinks about the king's question again. Tell me something true. He wonders if he should have said more, should have risked the specific truths that he keeps locked away. The king is not a bad man, not a tyrant, not a fool despite his need for fools. He is simply a man trying to hold together a kingdom that is always threatening to fall apart, trying to balance the competing demands of nobles and commoners, of allies and enemies, of tradition and necessity. He deserves honesty from someone, and the jester may be the only one positioned to provide it. But honesty is dangerous. Honesty can destroy the careful equilibrium that keeps everyone safe. Honesty can turn a friend into an enemy, can transform a secure position into a death sentence. The jester has survived as long as he has, by understanding where the boundaries lie, by knowing how much truth can be spoken and how much must remain hidden. He thinks about the future, which is something he tries not to do too often. How many more years can he continue this life? His body is aging, his reflexes slowing, his memory not quite as sharp as it once was. Someday, perhaps soon, he will no longer be able to tumble and jest with the energy that the court demands. What happens to an old jester? Some are pensioned off, given a small allowance, and a room in some forgotten corner of the castle, allowed to live out their remaining years in obscurity. Others are simply dismissed, sent away to make their way in a world they no longer understand. A few, the unlucky ones, make one joke too many, offend one person too powerful, and disappear in ways that no one speaks of afterward. He pushes these thoughts away. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own performances, its own careful navigation of the treacherous waters of court life. He cannot afford to spend his energy worrying about a future that may never arrive. The rain has stopped, he realizes. Through his small window, he can see a few stars emerging from behind the retreating clouds. The world continues its ancient rhythms, indifferent to the concerns of kings and fools alike. Somewhere in the castle, a baby cries and is comforted. Somewhere in the town beyond the walls, a dog barks at shadows. Somewhere in the vast darkness of the kingdom, people sleep and wake and live their lives, unaware of the negotiations and intrigues that will shape their futures. The jester closes his eyes. Tomorrow, the bells will ring again. Tomorrow, he will don the motley and become the fool. Will navigate the currents of power and personality, will make them laugh, because that is what he does, what he has always done, what he will continue to do until he can do it no longer. Tomorrow, he will tell jokes and tumble and sing, will speak truths wrapped in jest, will keep his deeper observations hidden behind the mask of foolishness. But tonight, in the darkness of his small chamber, he is simply a man. Tired, aging, alone, but alive. Still alive, after all these years, still surviving in a world that has destroyed so many others. There is a kind of victory in that, a quiet triumph that no one else will ever recognize or celebrate. He sleeps. And in the morning, when the bells of the castle toll for matins and consciousness returns like cold water seeping through cracks in stone, he will rise and dress and step once more into the corridor, his own bells chiming their announcement of his presence, his face arranged in the expression of cheerful foolishness that the world expects. The cycle will continue. The performance will resume. The fool will take his place beside the throne, ready to make them laugh, ready to speak the truths that no one else dares to speak, ready to navigate another day in the strange and perilous world of the medieval court. This is his life. This is what he has made of himself, what circumstances and talent and luck have conspired to create. It is not the life he imagined when he was young, not the life his parents wanted for him, not perhaps the life he would have chosen if he had understood what it would demand. But it is his life, the only one he has, and he has learned to find meaning in it, to take pride in the skills he has developed, to appreciate the unique perspective that his position provides. He is the fool. He is the truth-teller in motley. He is the one who makes them laugh when they would rather weep, who speaks wisdom through the veil of jest, who survives by understanding what others refuse to see. And tomorrow, when the sun rises over the castle and the court assembles, and the king takes his place upon the throne, he will be there, bells jingling, ready to perform. The costume waits on its peg. The bells wait in their silence. The morning waits beyond the window, patient and inevitable. And the jester, the man who was once a boy with a talent for making people laugh, the wanderer who found his way to the heart of power, the fool who sees more clearly than the wise, the jester sleeps, and in his dreams perhaps he is free. The castle stands in darkness, its stones holding the warmth of the day's fires, its corridors empty of all but shadows, and the quiet footsteps of the night watch. In chambers great and small, the powerful and the powerless alike surrender to sleep, their ambitions and fears temporarily set aside. The kingdom stretches beyond the walls, villages and farms and forests and rivers, all of it held together by the fragile bonds of loyalty and custom and force. And in a small room beside the great chimney, a man in a rough linen nightshirt lies on a thin straw mattress, his breathing slow and steady, his face relaxed in a way that it never is during waking hours. The party-colored costume hangs nearby, its bells silent, its colors invisible in the darkness, waiting for the morning that will surely come. This is how the day ends for a medieval jester. Not with applause or acclaim, not with the satisfaction of a great deed accomplished, but with the quiet relief of survival, the simple gratitude of another day navigated without disaster. It is a small life in many ways, confined to the margins of history, unlikely to be remembered by anyone, once the man who lives it is gone. The chronicles that record the deeds of kings will not mention the fool who made them laugh. The songs that celebrate great battles and noble loves will not include verses about the jester, who tumbled and jested in the shadows of the throne. But perhaps that is as it should be. The jester's art is ephemeral by nature, existing only in the moment of performance, vanishing as soon as the laughter fades. He leaves no monuments, no manuscripts, no legacy that future generations can study and admire. He leaves only the memory of laughter, the echo of a moment when the weight of the world was briefly lifted, when the powerful forgot their power and the fearful forgot their fear, and everyone in the hall was united in the simple human experience of amusement. That is something. That is perhaps enough. The night deepens. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The castle sleeps. And in the morning, the bells will ring again.